Guys, I hope you had I hope you had a good Shavuot. It's lovely to see you all. And we're going to start the shir. We're going to start with the brocha. Please have it in mind. I'm having it in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Barivna Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fiyamcha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzeimcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah le'emo Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol amim v'natan lanu Torato Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so guys, we're going to get started. Gav, thanks for making it. I know you haven't had much sleep. I just wanted to get on with it. It's not that I'm not concerned. It's just we just need to cover some ground. I hope all of you guys had a great Shavuot and you got a bit of learning, and even if it wasn't our stuff, if it was something, as long as you enjoyed it. So we are beginning on 5b2, and we're going to discuss the four particular cases. Sorry, we did 5b3, 6a1. All right, let's just see where the four cases actually start. All right, we did that. Let me just see, because what we want to do, 6a2, just one does. Okay, so the first case that we start is on 6a1. Okay, so 6a1 is where we begin to put the four cases into play. So what the four cases are, we're going to see now, is when it's not analogous to one particular damager and it's a combination of damages. It doesn't fit exactly in the block. We said we used that analogy of a kid that first learns about circles and squares and stars, etc., and they put the positive space object into the negative space and it fits in exact. These don't fit in exact, so we need more than one damager. So where do we get the summary? We actually get the summary from 6b2, and I'm going to put the summary of the four cases because it's going to help us. We're going to work backwards. Okay. So the Gemara has listed four cases of damage which liability can be derived from the common characteristic taught in the Mishnah. They are an item that is blown off a roof by a normal wind and causes damage after coming to rest. Okay. The second case is an item that rolled about by the feet of people or animals and causes damage after coming to rest. The third case is waste thrown into the public domain by a householder during the raining season that caused damage after coming to rest. And the fourth case is a tree or wall that fell down in the public domain and causes damage after the owner was warned to remove or repair it. Now, just a couple of things to mention about these four cases, which we're going to go through now. Apart from the fact that it ends on 6b2, each case was brought by a different sage. And it doesn't mean that in this case that the sages dispute each other. What it actually means in this case is that each of them was bringing a separate case in addition to those of his fellows. This is according to the Rosh. So it's very rare in a case that everybody agrees, but all of these sages that bring each of the cases agrees with the other in terms of the examples set forward. They just brought another example. Okay. Now, we're going to go into arguments afterwards in 6b2 as to whether when you bring two different damages together, you only bring the common characteristic, or do any of the liabilities or exemptions occur when you bring two damages together? Does that make sense? So, for example, when you bring together a case of fire and pit, would you create the exemptions for pit and fire together, or would it only be the primary case of the exemption versus liability? So before we get into any of that, let's keep it simple. Let me give you the four examples. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Give me one sec, guys. All right. So Rava brings a case that the common characteristic is expounded to include a case of pit that is rolled about by the feet of men and feet of animals. That's the second case. Okay, let me just bring this here. All right. So let's just bring the first case by Abaye. Sorry, guys. What I'm doing is this is actually quite a complicated Gemara. I want to actually make it so that it's as simple as possible, and then can we put all the pieces together afterwards? I think if I explain it simply, even though it doesn't follow the Gemara exactly, I think this is the simplest way to understand it. So just bear with me in this way. I'm customizing it a little bit, just in the sense of comprehension. So Abaye brings the first case, and it comes to include a case of one stone now for burden that is left on top of his roof. So this is the case. Guy's busy doing repairs, and he's got a screwdriver on his roof, right? And it fell down in a normal wind and did damage. So what we see are, what are the circumstances? If it fell down and it did damage while it was falling, what do you think that is a case of?
Wind. Fire.
Mave.
No,
Correct.
it's
Where do you see Mave?
No,
Who said Mave?
I said Mave.
Not correct.
no, it's fire because
Not correct,
fire
because
spread
Mave-
by wind.
Mave's me. Mave's me.
It's not man. It's not man. Arth, just give it one sec. You are right, Arth. You're absolutely right. But Markot can't be Mave because a guy's working on his roof. Let's just get the case clear. His DSTV satellite went down, and he's not going to pay the guy 900 Rand for a call-out fee when it's just that the bracket on top of the roof has to be screwed in. So he climbs on top of his roof, and he's busy doing repairs, and he's got his toolbox from his garage, okay? And he's got a roof. It's not a flat roof. It's a roof that's got slight amount of convex shape, right? So what happens is there's a normal wind, and what's going to happen when there's there's gravity is that object is going to come down and clip somebody on the head. Now, what we learned before in a couple of duffs, in the fourth duff, do you remember, is that anything that's on the roof, what are the totals of fire?
The totals of fire, talking about vessels that are in the particular area that are affected by the fire.
No, not at all.
Okay.
The fire, what is the unique feature of fire is that it goes forth to damage and that it needs the force of another. So when we learned in the fourth daf about, it was in the end of the third and the beginning of the fourth about fire, we said that the tordos of fire are something that has the same characteristics. They need another force in order to move. So when a stone, a knife, or a burden is stationary, we know that when that does damage, it's pit. And when it's in motion, like we used the example, if you remember in the duff, of a guy's Persian carpets. So I said, if the Persian carpets come off on the highway and they wrap around a guy's tire, that's a damage of pit. Because the guy didn't make it ownerless. They're worth 10 or 20 grand a piece. When it's flying off a bucky, because the guy never tied it down properly, and it hits your windshield and your car flips over, that's a case of fire because it's in motion. Where you got it confused is that we did learn that if some man uses his force, okay, that is a tort of man. That's where you got it confused because it's in motion with a force. But the discerning feature here is that man creates the force of the damage that he causes. So if he spits on somebody, the force of his spit, his projectile, or he hits somebody with a baseball bat, it is his force that caused it. In this case, it's not man that caused it. It is an external force, not part of man.
I got it.
You got it. All right. Cool. Okay, so Arthur, you dead on, is that the total of fire is any object that resembles fire and that is taken by another force, i.e. the wind. And why are we saying that it resembles fire? We're not talking about a gale force wind. Any wind that is, an act of God where a tornado comes out and lifts a car and that car spins and goes through your wall is obviously beyond somebody's control because they could never have predicted it. We're talking about the case of two things. You've got to work on the fact that A, there's gravity, or B, there's a natural wind, and that wind can come to take fire from one property to another or move an object that by blowing it off a roof. Okay, so in that case, it's a tordos. So if it was in motion, then it's purely a case of a subcategory of fire. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's not even a question. If it lands, if it already lands and does damage when it's landing, whatever it is, that's the case that we're talking about. Again, let's see what pit is. Pit is when you create an obstruction in the public domain, and where you left it is where it causes the damage. That's a clear case of pit. A case of fire is when it was traveling in motion off your roof and it then clipped somebody on top of the head and it damaged or injured or killed or whatever the case may be, or damaged somebody's property by your burden or your stone landing on somebody's windshield. That is a clear case of fire. Here we're talking about a case that Abaye said of both. How's it both? Because when it lands, at the point at which it lands, it now becomes pit. But it's not pit because it's not man that put it there or created dug the pit. Do you get what I'm saying? There's a third party involved. There's a wind. So in that case, we have to use a combination of fire and pit. Why is it not analogous to pit? He never left his screwdriver in the road where the animal came to stumble upon it or somebody slipped on it. Okay? So that would be a case of pit. It was blown off the roof in a normal wind. Now, if it injured on the way down, in motion, that's a classic case of fire. The both of them together is a case of what we call the common characteristic of pit and fire. Does this make sense to all of you?
Damon,
Yes.
could you say also when it did the damage, when it landed, it continued moving? Could that be like regal? It could be.
No. It's not regal.
Not at
It's a good question. Kevin's asking a good question, guys. Is that the reason it's not regal is in that case the property damaged in the normal way it's walking. This is not something that's a living thing. Regal has to be a living thing.
Got it. Sure. Okay.
But it's a good question because it appears to look like the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a case where we're using both in unison. Does that make sense? And why do we have to use both in unison? Is because if I've got a court case against you, what am I going to say in terms of defense? I never created a public obstruction to cause your animal damage. I never left my knife, and therefore it's not a tort I've put. You can't convict me. Is that correct, guys? Bit of feedback. You can't convict me.
No, you can't.
If I turn around to you and say to you that it's not analogous, well, that's why you need fire here. So what is the extra thing that we're coming to learn that we need fire? And Abaye is talking about a case where the object that you left on your roof has come to rest. Because if it's in motion, what is it? A torda of fire. Pure and simple. Okay, so that's the first case that's brought.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry,
Mark.
Sorry. Just with regal, is that with regal? Does it not have to relate to an animal? Oh.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
You've got different
Okay.
damages. No. It's a good question. I'll tell you why it's a good question. Because we spent like 2 or 3 doves just relating things to animals. All animals are coming to show you the different categories of damage. Your property and the person itself that causes damage. And within your property, some of the unique features are something that is living as well as inanimate. So it's a good question. But it can be anything that causes damage. So in this particular case, one of the questions that comes up in 6.2, and this is why I wanted to bring this case, is do we apply any of the leniencies involved? Meaning, let's look at the leniency of pit and fire, or the exemptions. Okay, what again, guys? What is the leniency or exemption of fire?
Vessels.
If something's hidden.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly, Gavin. Exactly. So, in other words, if something is hidden, you're not responsible to pay for it. If somebody hid their Picasso painting in a bale of hay, you don't come to pay for that. It's an exemption in terms of fire damage. According to Rav Yehuda, you do pay for it, but according to the rabbis, you don't. That's absolutely correct. And what is the exemption in terms of pit?
The depth, the depth.
Explain, Michael.
Well, with so many tefach high, then one would be liable for full damages. And if it was, what was it? No, it was less. Well, I can't remember the measurement. It was hot damage.
Marco is correct. Marco is correct, guys. According to the Rabbonim, if a man falls into a pit, not a man. If an animal falls into a pit, that's 10 tefach high. Sorry, that's 9 tefach high or less and dies. You're only responsible for the damage payment. If it's 10 tefach or more, you're responsible for the death sort of payment. Marco is 100% correct. It's not regarding man because remember there's an exemption that if man, according to Rav Yehuda, that if man falls in the pit, you don't pay if man dies in the pit because man should have looked where he was going. The exemption in terms of the pit height of 10 tefach or more is only to do with an animal. For 9 or less, you pay for injury. Anything more than 9, for 10 and higher, you pay for death. Mark is completely correct in terms of the exemption. So if it's 7 tefach, for example, an animal fell in and died, you pay for the damage portion but not for the death. You're correct. According to all the rabbis, the exemption of pit is another one. What is it, guys?
Any broken vessels?
Yes.
Vessels.
Yes. So in other words, if a donkey falls in the pit and is carrying in his rucksack a ming vase, you pay for the donkey's death or damage, or death if it's 10 or more, or damage if it's 9 tefach or less. But you do not pay for the utensils that are broken. Rav Yehuda says you do. You just don't pay if man dies in the pit. Okay, so those are right, guys. You guys are on the mark, exactly on the mark. Well done, Kev. So that's exactly it. So we've had Arthur get it right today. Mark will get it right today. Kevin and Gavin get it right today. This preparation works.
Thank you. I just want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
If a man falls into a pit and he dies, okay, then it's not a problem. You don't have to pay because it's his own fault. It doesn't make a difference.
No. Just hang on a second. This is a case that's going to be dealt with at length. This is according to Rav Yehuda. We're going to deal with it at length at a later stage. It's not all opinion.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so listen, why I brought this up is we want to know if you use 2 avos in concert for the common characteristic. Do you bring the exemption for both of them or one of them? Let me give you an example. This case, well, you don't know yet, Arth.
Okay, go.
Well, tell me how you know it's one, if you know it's one.
Well, okay, I'm going shooting the mark. You go.
No, explain. I'm listening.
Because
I'm asking you.
Okay, so from what I learned this weekend when I was doing it, you only have to bring the one because the other one, you bring the one that suits the case, not the other, because they cancel out each other. So let's say one is in the public domain, okay, which is, let's say, for a regal, right? But then you bring along pit, that's another one. You can't bring, one will cancel out the other. So you can't. You bring the one that's beneficial. Okay. Maybe I misread it.
So how it works is as follows. Is it depends on the case.
Okay.
In some cases, they cancel out each other, and in some cases, they both apply, and in some cases, neither apply. I'm sorry.
You cleared that up.
But in some cases, you're right, Art. Let me just give it to you in some cases.
Hey, my broken watch is right twice a day as well. I mean...
Exactly. So, guys, let me just tell you what Arthur and I are discussing is that if you're using, for example, with Rav Abaye's case, what did we use here? We used fire and we used pit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Guys? Okay, it makes sense. Fine. So what we want to know is, do the exemptions apply when we're using the common characteristic? Okay. So there's a disagreement amongst the Rishonim as to whether the extent of the liability. Okay. In other words, if you maintain that the liability is derived from two avots together, the exemption of both of the avos apply.
Okay.
Does this make sense, Arth?
Yeah.
That's the general rule. Exemptions of both the avos apply, and where you can find it is in Note 11 on 6b2. So that's the general rule, but there are exceptions. Now, let me just tell you what the exception is. So it would be exempt for both damage to utensils, as in the rule of pit, and for damage in hidden items, as in the law of fires. According to other Rishonim, in the final analysis, these cases are discussed as full-fledged toldot of pit, because like a pit, they inflict damage from a stationary position. So the fact that they drag another damager, either fire or oxen, to derive their liability is a technicality that does not affect their classification. So according to that opinion, in the case of a stone, knife, or burden that blew in the public domain, the owner is exempt only if the damage to utensils, but is liable for damage to hidden items. Okay, so let me just unpack this for you clearly. So some of the Rishonim say that you would have both exemptions. In other words, if it's fire and pit, you would have either both leniencies or both exceptions. And in these four cases, some other Rishonim say, listen, the other factor, what is the other factor here? In this case of Rabbi Abaye, it's purely a case where fire is the other factor. Because let's face it, what's the main thing here is that it damaged from a stationary position, so it's pit. So some of the other Rishonim say that you're responsible for the pit aspect of the exemption. In other words, say an animal slipped on it, a donkey, and it was carrying a ming vase, and it injured the donkey. You would pay for the donkey's, damage, but you wouldn't pay for the ming vase. But there isn't the aspect of fire because there's not a real fire that took place. Does that make sense? It's a Tordor fire in this particular case. So obviously damage to hidden things doesn't occur. And you'll find it's funny though, because the damage to hidden things with fire and pit are similar, because we talk about the exemption of a hidden thing that falls in a pit, or the exemption of damage that's hidden in a Picasso in a haystack that's subject to fire. So in that case, they're the same thing, so that would apply. But some of the other unique features, not necessarily. So to make a very complicated story simple, the exemptions of both avos generally apply, but when you have a case where it would seem that there would be one main emphasis, like in this case, pit, and fire just comes to say, listen, you don't have to be the one to dig the hole to cause the damage. If you weren't watching your object and it resembled fire, that it blew off from another force, you're still responsible for that damage of pit because it created a hazard in the public domain from a stationary position, and therefore you cannot use the excuse that you, having not created it, is a reason for you to be exempted. Make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Okay, so Arthur, you are right in some cases, but
Some of them.
not where there's an emphasis. No, you are, but not where there's an emphasis on one. They don't automatically cancel themselves up. I want to see where you saw that note, though, just so that you and I can clear it up.
I'll look through the
guys. Okay, guys, I don't want to use the second example now of Rava's case. We finished 6A1. Why don't I want to do it? Because I think we've got clarity on this particular example. Let's not let's not go into another example. Is that fair? Can we cancel the session now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's
All right, guys. Lovely to see you. And thanks for
That's
all
it.
contributing. You guys all made it magnificent. I appreciate the effort. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Pleasure, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Yeah.